Hi, I'm Hebe and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this bunting. So for this tutorial you will need 6 different types of fabric, bias binding, scissors, the pattern piece, tailor's chalk and a thread to match your bias binding. You will also need a sewing machine that does a basic straight stitch. To start with, take the pattern piece and then get your fabric and making sure that the top lines up with the grain of the fabric, and if your fabric has a pattern, make sure that the top is at the top of the pattern with the pattern coming down. Don't draw on your pattern diagonally, as this will be using the bias of the fabric and that's not what we want. Draw around your pattern. With each fabric you're going to want to cut out 4 triangles, so here I am marking out 4. You'll see here that I'm using a biro and that I'm marking on the good side of the fabric. I wouldn't usually recommend doing this, but I like to mark things out with a biro as it gives a neater edge. But if this is your first time sewing, I'd recommend marking it on the back of the fabric and using the tailor's chalk. Once you've marked them all out, grab your scissors and carefully cut on the lines that you have just drawn. As I said earlier, we're going to cut out 4 triangles from each of the 6 fabrics, so you'll end up with 24 triangles overall, and as you'll see later, that will make 12 flags for your bunting. Once you've cut out all of your pieces, you should have 4 triangles in each of your 6 fabrics. Next, take your bias binding, and then using a tape measure, we're going to mark where the flags are going to go. So starting at one end, mark in 22 centimetres. Then from that mark 12 centimetres. Keep marking 12 centimetres down your bias binding until you have made a total of 12 marks. This should leave you with approximately 25 centimetres at the other end of your binding. You will now have all of the pieces that you need to make your bunting. Now it's time to start sewing. So take your first pair of triangles and line them up so that the edges match all the way around. We're going to sew down the 2 long edges of the triangle, making sure that we leave that top edge open. I'm going to use a basic straight stitch on my sewing machine and sew about 1 centimetre in from the edge of the fabric. When you start sewing, make sure that you always go forwards and backwards, as this secures the stitch so it doesn't come undone when we turn the triangles through later. When I get to the bottom of the triangle here, I'm going to leave my needle in, lift my foot up and then turn the fabric round, and now I'm ready to go and sew back up to the top of the fabric. Again, once I reach the top, don't forget to go both forwards and backwards. You can go ahead and do this for the other 11 pairs of triangles that you have left. Once you have your triangle, you can snip off the end, and then when you turn it through, that will help to give a nice sharp point. Sometimes I like to use my scissors to make sure that I get the point really nice and sharp. Once you've sewn up all your triangles and turned them all through, you should have 12 flags that we're going to use to make the bunting. Now it's time for the final step of the bunting. First of all, I'm going to take my scissors and just cut off those little ears sticking up out of the flags. This will just make it a bit easier for when we sew the bias binding on, as we won't have to try and fold them in to make it all sit flat and nice. Now you will see that I'm just arranging my flags in the order that I want to sew them onto my binding. I've got 6 different types of fabric and 12 flags, and I just want to make sure that I'm not going to have any of the same fabric sitting next to each other. I just find it easier to have them in the right order so I don't have to think about it while I'm trying to sew them on. Now I'm going to take my bias binding and I'm just going to trim off the corners. I'm going to fold over the end by approximately 1 cm and then fold this in half. I'm then going to secure this on my sewing machine using a straight stitch. Again, don't forget to go both forwards and backwards, as this will ensure that the stitch doesn't come undone. Once I've secured the end, I'm going to carry on sewing down, making sure that the binding is very neatly folded in half. Bias binding can be a little bit tricky to sew. Because it's cut from the bias, it can make it very stretchy, so just make sure that you're keeping the sewing flat and you're not pulling on it so you're not distorting it out of shape at all. I'm going to keep sewing down until I get to my first chalk mark that I made earlier. When I get to there, I'm going to make sure that I stop so that I can put in the first flag. I'm going to line up the corner of the flag with that chalk mark that I made earlier. I'm going to make sure that the bias binding is folded neatly in half to cover the top of the flag and making sure that it's not longer on one side than it is on the other. Then I'm going to just keep sewing down nice and steady in a straight stitch so that that flag is secured in between the bias binding. Once I've sewn the first flag in, I'm going to keep going down, using the chalk marks as reference points to sew the other flags in. Keep doing this until you've sewn all 12 flags in. You can see here that I'm occasionally checking my work to make sure that I have caught all the binding and all the flags in and this is neat. Remember, if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter, you can just unpick it and go over it again. Once I've sewn in my last flag, I'm going to take the beginning of the bunting and just measure that the excess binding on each end is the same length. And I'm going to trim the excess off. I'm then going to continue sewing on down to the end of the binding. Once I get to the end, I'm going to fold it over by 1 centimetre and then fold the binding in half again. This just makes sure that there's no raw edges showing and that it's all nice and neat. I'll then carry on sewing to the end, making sure that I remember to go forwards and backwards so that it's nice and secure. And there you go, you've finished your bunting. Thank you for watching and I really hope you enjoyed this video. The free pattern is available in the link below and please like and subscribe for more videos.